The Trojan War dragged on for 10 long, grueling years, a conflict that had consumed the lives and hopes of thousands. The land itself seemed weary, scarred by endless battles and the cries of the fallen. Each sunrise brought new uncertainty, and every night the soldiers wondered if the war would ever end. But now, at last, its end was near. Both armies sensed a final reckoning approaching, and a heavy silence hung over the battered camps. The Greeks and Trojans alike felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon them. The Greeks' greatest warrior, Achilles, stood ready to face a new and formidable challenger, Memnon, the proud king of Ethiopia, who had come to aid Troy with his own mighty host. Memnon was said to be nearly Achilles' equal, a hero whose legend had traveled far beyond the battlefield. The Trojans pinned their last hopes on Memnon, praying he could turn the tide of war. Both armies gathered, hearts pounding, knowing that this duel would decide the fate of Troy itself. The air was thick with anticipation and dread. On the blood-soaked plain, Achilles and Memnon clashed, two lions locked in a struggle for eternal glory. Their armor gleamed in the morning light, and every movement was watched by thousands of anxious eyes. Their spears thundered, shields rang out like thunder, and neither could gain the upper hand. The ground shook beneath their feet as they traded blow for blow, each refusing to yield. Soldiers from both sides watched, breathless and wide-eyed, as legends fought before their eyes. Every strike, every parry seemed to echo the hopes and fears of their entire nations. At last Achilles, burning with the fury of a demigod, summoned all his strength and struck Memnon down. The mighty king fell, his armor clattering to the earth, and with him fell the last hope of Troy. The Trojans wailed in despair, their cries rising above the din of battle, while the Greeks roared in triumph, their spirits soaring at the sight of their champion's victory. With Memnon gone, Trojan courage broke like a wave against the rocks. Fear swept through their ranks, and the once proud defenders faltered. Achilles, unstoppable and relentless, led a furious charge, scattering the Trojans back to their towering city walls. His presence alone was enough to send terror through the enemy lines. He was a force of nature, a storm sweeping across the battlefield, leaving chaos and defeat in his wake. No one dared stand in his path. The Trojans fled in panic, desperate to reach the safety of the Scaean Gate. The city's defenders crowded the entrance, fear etched on every face. Achilles cut down any who lagged behind, driving terror before him. The ground was littered with the fallen, a grim testament to his wrath. He reached the gates of Troy, poised to end the war that had consumed a generation. The city trembled as he stood before its walls, the fate of Troy hanging by a thread. Nothing seemed able to stop him. Achilles, the greatest of the Greeks, stood at the threshold of victory, his legend forever etched into the story of Troy. Achilles stood before the Scaean Gate, his armor gleaming in the harsh sunlight, a living legend come to life. The air was thick with tension, every eye fixed on the mighty warrior who had become the embodiment of Greek vengeance. His very presence seemed to electrify the battlefield, and even the bravest hearts felt a tremor of fear. He was a vision of wrath and power, his face streaked with dust and sweat, eyes burning with a fire that could not be quenched. Achilles was more than a man, he was a force of nature, unstoppable and unyielding. The Trojans cowered behind their walls, terrified by his relentless fury. Mothers clutched their children, elders whispered prayers, and soldiers gripped their spears with trembling hands, knowing that the storm was about to break upon them. The Greeks, emboldened by Achilles' return, pressed forward with renewed vigor, believing victory was at hand. Their shouts echoed across the plain, a chorus of hope and bloodlust as they surged toward the city gates. Achilles' rage was more than a warrior's passion, it was grief and defiance against fate itself. The loss of Patroclus had shattered him, and now his sorrow burned as hot as his anger, driving him to the edge of madness. He mourned Patroclus and raged at the gods, his anger fueling his strength. Each blow he struck was a cry of pain and a demand for justice, as if he could bend destiny to his will through sheer force. He shouted challenges, daring any Trojan to face him. His voice thundered across the battlefield, a call that none could ignore, yet few dared to answer. Achilles demanded a reckoning, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The Greeks battered the gates, shields raised against arrows and stones. The clash of metal and the cries of battle filled the air as the defenders rained down missiles in a desperate attempt to hold back the tide. The Trojans fought desperately, defending their home with everything they had. Every man, woman, and child within Troy knew that their fate hung in the balance, and they summoned every ounce of courage to resist the onslaught. But Achilles' presence was overwhelming, his fury contagious. His fellow Greeks rallied around him, inspired by his unbreakable will, and the Trojans felt the weight of his wrath pressing down upon them. The gates trembled under the assault, battered by relentless blows and the force of destiny itself. Each strike brought the Greeks closer to victory and the defenders closer to despair. The final chapter of the war was about to begin. The fate of Troy hung by a thread. The city's defenders watched in terror and awe, knowing that the next moments would decide the future of their world. The world watched as Achilles threatened to break through, his legend growing with every heartbeat, and the destiny of Troy poised on the edge of a blade. High above, the gods watched as Achilles threatened to destroy Troy. Apollo, protector of the Trojans, grew furious at Achilles' rampage. Achilles' pride, his hubris, challenged the gods themselves. Apollo decided to intervene, to remind mortals of their place. He descended in a golden mist, seeking Paris atop Troy's walls. Paris, more archer than warrior, watched the chaos below. Apollo whispered to Paris, pointing to Achilles, "There is your enemy. Every man has a weakness." The god promised to guide Paris's arrow. Emboldened, Paris took up his bow, selecting his sharpest arrow. With Apollo's power behind him, he prepared to do what no Trojan had done. The fate of Achilles and the war rested on this single shot. Paris drew his bow, heart pounding. The gods held their breath. The moment of destiny had arrived. Guided by the will of Apollo, the god of prophecy and archery, fate itself seemed to hang in the balance. The sun glinted off Apollo's bow, casting an ethereal light over the battlefield, as if the heavens themselves were watching this moment unfold. Paris, prince of Troy, stood trembling yet resolute, his hand steadying the bow as he drew the string back. With Apollo's unseen hand guiding his aim, Paris released his arrow into the chaos. The air was thick with the sounds of clashing swords and desperate cries, but in that instant, time seemed to slow. Achilles, the unstoppable force of the Greeks, was suddenly vulnerable, his attention fixed on the enemies before him. Unaware of the danger that approached from behind, the arrow soared through the air, not seeking Achilles' chest or head where his armor was strongest, but for his heel, the one spot left unprotected by his mother Thetis' magic. The shaft struck true, guided by divine intent, piercing the only weakness the mighty warrior possessed. Pain, sharp and blinding, seared through Achilles' body. The agony was unlike any wound he had suffered before, a burning reminder of his mortality. He staggered, his legendary strength faltering for the first time. Realizing his fate had finally caught up to him, Achilles roared in agony, the sound echoing across the field and striking fear into friend and foe alike. With trembling hands he pulled the arrow from his heel. Blood poured from the small but fatal wound. He cursed Apollo, his voice filled with rage and disbelief, knowing this was no mortal's doing, but the will of the gods themselves. Achilles' eyes blazed with fury and defiance, even as pain racked his body. He glared skyward, challenging the gods who had sealed his fate, refusing to surrender to despair. Even as his strength faded, Achilles' indomitable spirit burned brighter than ever. He refused to fall quietly, his will unbroken despite the mortal blow. Gritting his teeth, he tried to fight on, determined to defy death itself and take as many enemies with him as he could. Surrounded by foes, Achilles made his last stand, swinging his weapon with desperate strength, unwilling to yield even as his life ebbed away. The Greeks watched in horror as their greatest hero faltered, panic and disbelief spreading through their ranks. The sight of Achilles wounded shook their confidence to its core. For the first time, the Trojans sensed hope. Their enemy, once thought invincible, was now brought low, and a surge of courage swept through their ranks. Achilles' legend, forged in countless battles, met its mortal end on that blood-soaked field. The hero who had defied fate for so long was finally claimed by it. For a moment, the battlefield held its breath. Soldiers on both sides stood frozen, awed by the fall of a legend. The greatest warrior of his age was falling, and with him, an era of heroes drew to a close. Achilles, wounded but defiant, fought on. The Trojans, emboldened, pressed forward as their enemy faltered. Achilles, leaning on his spear, cut down foes even in agony. But the Trojans attacked from a distance, overwhelming him with arrows and spears. His strength ebbed, the poison of Apollo's arrow spreading. He fell to one knee, shield raised, surrounded by chaos. The Greeks fought desperately to reach him. The battlefield froze as Achilles collapsed, face down in the dust. Silence fell. A legend had died. The Trojans erupted in victory, scarcely believing Achilles was gone. The Greeks were shattered by grief and disbelief. The heart of their army had stopped beating. The war's balance shifted in a single moment. Achilles' death echoed across the plain. The age of heroes was ending. As Achilles fell, a brutal struggle erupted over his body. The Trojans sought to claim his armor and dishonor their greatest foe. The Greeks, led by Ajax and Odysseus, formed a shield wall around him. Ajax stood like a mountain, Odysseus directing the defense. The battle raged, dust and blood thick in the air. Both sides fought with desperation, one for honor, one for vengeance. At last Ajax lifted Achilles' body, Odysseus covering the retreat. The Greeks carried their hero back to camp, saving him from disgrace. The struggle for Achilles' body became legend. Even in death, he inspired courage and loyalty. Achilles' body returned to camp and the Greeks mourned deeply. Leaders gathered, washing away the dust of battle from their fallen champion. His mother, Thetis, rose from the sea, her lament echoing through the camp. The muses sang of his deeds and tragic fate. For 17 days the Greeks grieved, refusing to fight. On the 18th day they built a grand funeral pyre. Achilles' bones were mixed with Patroclus's, united in death. The ashes were placed in a golden urn, buried beneath a great mound. His tomb became a monument to heroism. Achilles' farewell was worthy of a legend. To honor Achilles, the Greeks held funeral games, contests of strength and skill. Thetis provided magnificent prizes for the victors. Chariot races thundered across the plain, followed by boxing, wrestling, and foot races. Each event celebrated the warrior spirit Achilles embodied. Archery and spear throwing tested the best among them. The games united the army, lifting spirits and restoring hope. Friendly rivalry honored Achilles' competitive nature. The contest reminded the Greeks of their strength even without their champion. When the games ended, the army looked forward, determined to finish the war. Achilles' memory inspired them to fight on. Achilles' legend did not end with his death. The Greeks believed his spirit was taken to the White Island, a paradise for heroes. There he found peace, reunited with Patroclus and other legends. Some tales say he befriended Hector or even wed Helen. In this realm, all past sorrows were forgotten. Achilles became the symbol of heroic immortality. His name lived on, inspiring generations. The spirit of Achilles, they believed, would never die.